This is the opening shot of Her, Spike Jonze's poignant film exploring the edges of the romance genre, with the relationship studied being between a man and an artificial intelligence. At least on the surface that's what the film's about. Yet by the film's conclusion, if your experience was anything like mine, you may have found yourself having undergone an almost transcendental experience, connecting your own life events with many of the high-concept existential ideas that the film raises. What does it mean to truly love someone? And what purpose does love give to our lives? It's within the film's first few moments that we're given the techniques and the themes that will be used to address these complex proposals over the course of the story. What I find so interesting about the filmmaking of Her is that at its core, it's a love story. And making a love story is one thing. To make a film's primary subject matter and emotion can be a difficult thing to capture in itself. But how do you show the blossom and decay of a relationship between two people when only one is present?
Hello, I'm here.
Oh. Hi.
Hi.
Her is a love story in terms of narrative, but in terms of a movie, it's a character study. Where many filmic depictions of affection have a duo of subjects to look at, Her has just the one, an artistic decision that separates it from many other romantic portrayals. Theodore Twombly is our main character, and even though he exists in a futuristic, verticalized Los Angeles, an alien world begging to be explored, it's the distinguishing character traits of what makes him an individual where the film prioritizes almost all of its attention. By following many conventions of character studies, Her manages to put the audience in the shoes of the main character. We follow Theodore almost exclusively, and thus relate ourselves with him. We see the world through his eyes and gain a better comprehension of his experiences, but most importantly, he begins his story in a state of unrest, one of the most effective ways to instill a correlative emotional journey with the viewer, because it circumscribes the character's existence solely to the universe of the film, and we know so much about the character to know that he's undeserving of such a melancholy experience, so we empathise with him. It's the structure of the film that helps us identify with our protagonist, but it's through the subtle choices in filmmaking techniques where Her is able to develop depth to Theodore's character arc. Theodore is lost in a state of emotional purgatory, but through the filmmaking his choices are put on display, to side with the lifestyle that he wants or the lifestyle that he needs.
Play a melancholy song.
When you know you're gonna die, it isn't easy.
Play a different melancholy song.
The dominant theme of Her is loneliness, something that our main character is all too familiar with. The notion that he doesn't fit in constantly looms over his head. The film demonstrates this throughout, but is very subdued about it. For instance, Theodore constantly seems to be travelling along a different path to the people around him, signifying just how lost he is in this world. And the contrast of his brightly coloured attire often makes him stand out amongst the more muted hues of his surroundings. Theodore just doesn't seem to belong here. We discover that the cause for the isolation he feels comes from his recent separation from his wife, and the void that it's left. The film's composition exemplifies just how much this solitude plagues him, always showing couples in two shots, but shooting Theodore in a single, the emptiness of the frame mimicking his internal struggle. He counteracts his feeling as many of us do, avoiding major responsibilities in place of finding activities that give him instant gratification as opposed to any long-term satisfaction. He plays video games that seem to have no real goal. And when it comes to actual solutions to his problems,
I miss you. I mean, not the sad, mopey you. The old, fun you. Let's get him out. Give me a shout back.
he ignores them.
Amy.
Respond later.
Email from Los Angeles Times Weather.
But he will always go for the quick and easy fulfillment. All these details serve to show that Theodore needs to regain structure in his life, and not only does the film show that he needs to, but it manages to also indicate the change that Theodore wants. The most common way that this is shown in Her is through its use of montage. There are many occurrences where the present is intercut with scenes from Theodore's past. Now normally this would just be a way of giving us a brief insight into our character's former life, but in Her, we learn how the past affects him presently through the film's usage of montage theory. Sometimes editing isn't just about when you decide to cut, but where you do. The concept behind montage theory, popularised by Sergei Eisenstein, was that when two pieces of footage are placed next to one another, a third meaning is created. The joining of one shot representing one idea with another representing another idea results in the emergence of a new insinuated third meaning. Think of it as a psychological suggestion. For example, take the footage from Theodore's past without any context. It's heartwarming, it's a wonderful display of affection, but when placed next to this image, it's given new context.
Now we have a close-up. Let me show what he sees. He saw a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now we cut back to his reaction to what he sees. And he smiles. He's a kindly man. Now, let's take the middle piece of film away, the woman with the child. Now we'll put in a piece of film of a girl in a bikini. He looks, he smiles. What is he now? The dirty old man.
Let's imagine that these segments of the film were used as transitional devices in between scenes. They'd still work to teach us about Theodore's past, but in Her, a close-up of Theodore's face precedes every montage. Knowing what we know about montage theory, this creates the third meaning that these montages are the fragmented thoughts of Theodore, and through gaining this context, we not only learn about his past, but also about his desires. Simply through the film's editing, we've learnt about our characters' goals without them being explained to us. The fact that Theodore chooses to think about these moments even though they hurt is because this is the life that he yearns for. Yet it's his wants that are holding him back from a deeper satisfaction that he needs. Eventually, Theodore meets Samantha, and this evolves into a meaningful connection that Theodore was looking for, but as we see, he remains conflicted in his decisions. Theodore and Samantha do love each other, this much is undeniable. However, even in their relationship, Theodore's love for his ex-wife, for human interaction, is his true desire, as his wants remain on display through the continued montage motif. It's here that Her utilises the narrative device of wants versus needs. Theodore doesn't acknowledge his problems. In fact, the only way he can really express his emotions is through the surrogate of his work.
Because I love the way you look at the world. I'm so happy I get to be next to you and look at the world through your eyes. Love, Maria.
He wants that disconnect because his needs are in opposition to his wants. A relationship is the only way that Theodore validates his own existence. But the film shows us that if Theodore wants to remove his loneliness, he has to accept that we can't always get what we want. And so if he hopes to counteract the sadness he feels, he must gain a greater connection with the world around him. And it's in this world that the film shows us Theodore's needs.
Like this utopic world that everything's nice and everything's comfortable, yet even in this world where you're seemingly getting everything you need and having this nice life, there's still loneliness and longing and isolation and disconnection. You know, much like our world, but just a heightened version of our world where everything is getting nicer as the years go. And there's more design and there's more convenience and our technology is making things easier, but there's still this loneliness.
If Theodore's needs are visually manifested into a disengagement with his surroundings, then the film's use of shallow focus demonstrates just how far Theodore is from its goals. Her is ubiquitous in its use of shallow focus, but is very specific when it does and doesn't use it. Almost every shot of Theodore and the skyline of Los Angeles show Theodore in focus and the city out of focus. This technique creates a disconnect between the two subjects because it makes them feel detached from one another. We've established that the world is what Theodore needs to connect with, yet this visual cue suggests as though it's rejecting him. Having a subject and their surroundings in focus is a technique wherein you can learn more about your character through how their environment is reflective of their personality. But here it seems as though Theodore has no true home. That's until the few occurrences that Theodore and the city are both in focus. These rare instances directly follow moments where Theodore begins to accept his situation and recognise that perhaps the search for an answer to his loneliness doesn't lie in the pursuit of what he wants. Whenever Theodore realises this, the closer he comes to gaining that connectivity to his surroundings, suggested through the film's shift into moments of deep focus, connecting both Theodore and his world. It's bittersweet, but it's honest. During many of the moments when Theodore appears to be happy with Samantha, the film begins to subtly change. He wears colours that blend him in more, the lighting becomes warmer. And yet, at the same time, his relation to his world often remains unaltered. These minor tonal shifts come at a price because the relationship between Theodore and Samantha is, no matter how fulfilling, ultimately doomed. The movie suggests that the happiness that Theodore gains is merely artificial because he hasn't acknowledged his true problems. He's merely pushing the thoughts of his old life to the back of his mind, and that is what's influencing his decisions. And this combination of character wants disrupting character needs is perfectly summed up in one sentence.
That was a story I was telling myself, that I was somehow inferior. Isn't that interesting? The past is just a story we tell ourselves.
The montages of Theodore's past are the lies that Theodore tells himself. He's become a slave to the idea that he can live in the utopia he longs for. This is how the movie shows us wants versus needs, conveying to us what the character's personal goals are, but how in pursuing those goals, sadly, only removes them from a much grander picture.
And while I'm here, I want to allow myself joy. So fuck it.
Theodore reflects many of us, choosing to go with the easy routes in our lives so that we don't have to address the hardships that we face. The filmmaking of Her shows us the dichotomy of choosing between what we want against what we need. But it also shows us that these issues can be rectified for our character if there's a recognition that the loneliness Theodore feels is an experience shared by everyone. Theodore isn't the only one guilty of living vicariously through a surrogate. Some do it through their art, others may do it through relationships, and we all from time to time ignore the real world in place of our technology. The biggest crime that Theodore commits is that he's unable to see that loneliness is a shared experience. He's so caught up in the lie of the past that he doesn't realise he's veiled his present surroundings. This is the opening shot of Her, a man living his life vicariously through something else, his background again blurred out. Yet, as we see his surroundings, we learn that everyone's the same. They too don't fit in with their background, expressing themselves through a surrogate too. Her shows us that loneliness is a part of life that we must overcome.
What makes me, me, is my ability to grow through my experiences. So basically, in every moment I'm evolving, just like you.
And so as Theodore becomes willing to accept that happiness doesn't always arrive from the places we want it to, his world opens up to him. And our character begins as this, and ends as this. Her is an example of how a character arc can be completely utilised through visual metaphors. And sometimes when creating a character, their needs must be prioritised over everything else. Because although it may mean accepting a degree of sadness in their story, that's life. And only through this realisation do we get to where it is that we should be.
I'm lying